Welcome, everyone. My name is Maggie Tuck, and the conference topic this afternoon is Me Too versus Time's Up, which has been a topic of conversation in our country this year and really around the world. For some of us, it has been a topic of conversation for much longer than that, and that's really why I wanted this to be a topic of conversation today. I know that some people in this room are going to relate to some of the things that I'm going to say, and I encourage you to bring that up as you are comfortable here in a little while. We aren't just here to listen to me speak, but I will tell you a little bit about my background. At the age of 3, I was sexually molested repeatedly by a family member, and I told my family about the sexual molestation at the age of 8. A phone call was made, the family member denied it, and that was the extent of what was done about it. I was never given the opportunity to seek counseling. No one ever said, "I'm sorry this happened to you." No one ever said, "It's not your fault." No one ever dealt with the fact that I wet the bed for most of my childhood, that I had a recurring nightmare that to this day I could tell you every detail of for most of my life. None of that was ever dealt with. So fast forwarding through that, so something that happens, and anyone who has been molested can tell you that if you're molested as a child, it changes your personality. The thing that always hits me is I wonder who I would have been. I wonder what kind of person I would have been if that hadn't happened to me. Would I have been nicer? Would I have been less strong? I don't know. I have no idea because I wasn't given that opportunity. Someone stole that from me. Fast forwarding 30 years later, I was raped. 30 years. So you think about that for a moment. At that point in my life, I was a grown woman. I owned my own home. I was a single mom. I was a military member. And I felt really confident in who I was. I was strong, I was independent, and I thought, dealt with the demons of being molested as a child. So to lose all of that set me back in a way that I didn't even know was humanly possible. I developed such an anxiety that I had to take a Xanax to get on an airplane or go into a room like this. You all would have scared me to death. It crippled me. It crippled my ability to make decisions because the reason that I was raped was I was trying to be kind to someone. And for the longest time, I thought I was kind to someone. My judgment is poor. My sons could have been hurt. I couldn't protect them. I couldn't protect myself. I'm a soldier. I'm a military member, and I couldn't protect myself. I'm a failure as a human. And that was my mental dialogue for a very long time. I fortunately was able to receive counseling through the Victim Center. However, my case was not prosecuted, and the way that I understand it, even though I filed charges, most women's cases are not prosecuted. Most men's cases are not prosecuted. We have an epidemic in our nation that sexual crimes are not seen as crimes. They just go on. We just go on, and we're supposed to live with it. I spent Memorial Day in the emergency room facing the humiliation, and anyone who has gone through it, you understand the humiliation of dealing with what happens to you when you are raped. And there's nothing like it. And then dealing with all the mental stuff that followed after that. And the individual that raped me is a teacher and is allowed to be around young women every day and is never ever faced a moment of consequence for what happened. Then 2 days later, I got to go in front of a judge and ask for a restraining order, and I had to go in front of the judge against the person that I was asking for the restraining order. Now, keep in mind that I had just been violently raped. I had a splint on my arm, and I had to sit in the hall and wait for the judge in the same hallway as this person. That is our system. Now, I am a college-educated military member, and it was all that I could do. And I continued to pursue prosecuting this person. Now, I want you to think about someone who isn't me, who is a 3-year-old little girl, a 12-year-old little girl, a 16-year-old little girl, a 30-year-old woman who is repeatedly raped by her spouse, a 30-year-old man who is abused by his spouse, or a 30-year-old man that comes out of a bar and is raped. It happens every single day. And here in Springfield, we have a serious problem because of the mentality that people don't want to report it because these crimes are not being prosecuted. So the conversation today is Me Too versus Time's Up. I have yet to meet anyone who can tell me that at some point in their life they did not face some sort of harassment. What's exciting for us is that we're living in a time where people are saying exactly that. Time's up. Enough is enough. And I'm so proud to be living during that time, but I'm angry. I'm angry that it has taken this long for this to happen. And I'm angry that people think that it only happens to weak women who can't defend themselves, because that simply isn't true. We have men being harassed. We have women being harassed. We have transsexuals being harassed. There's no line being drawn of whom can't be bullied. So we're talking about the difference between Time's Up and Me Too. How many of you know someone who is not a female who has been raped? I have a dear friend who was gang raped. And when he went to the emergency room staff didn't care about taking care of him because he was homosexual. He developed HIV from the gang rape. He was brutally beaten, and they didn't even call the police while he was there. So many times men are afraid to report something because of the social stigma, because they're embarrassed. And this is something else that is very serious, that we can't ignore it. We can't make Time's Up or Me Too simply a female issue. It isn't. it isn't a victim issue. It isn't a gender issue. It is an issue about people brutalizing other people, whether it's with their words or with their power that they think that they hold over someone else. And whether you have been a victim or whether you know a victim, you can help, and we can make this a conversation. Is it comfortable? Absolutely not. It is hard for me to sit here. It is very hard for me to sit here. I didn't used to use the word rape. I used to use the word assault. But you know what? Assault is the nice word. It makes people feel better. No one wants to think about that word rape because of what it implies. The truth of the matter is, somebody didn't just hit me. I wish that was the case. How sad is it that I have to say, I wish someone had just hit me? For the longest time, I didn't tell my sons what happened to me because I didn't want them to have that image in their head. I never wanted them to know about it. When they reached adulthood, I decided that it was important that they knew, because there was a dark period in my life that they needed to understand. This is what happened. This is why I struggled. And you need to know that this is what kind of changed me. And this is why I'm sort of a badass feminist now. I need you to know that I overcame it, and the reason you guys got raised the way you did is because this happened, and now I want to make something positive out of it. And so I don't hide behind it anymore. I use it as this, hey, this happened to me, and I'm going to do something positive with it. And I talk to so many people that have been brutalized. But I don't like to use the term victim. I don't want to be a victim. I don't want to be a victim. A victim means that I get to suffer with something that somebody else did to me for the rest of my life. And I refuse to give either one of them that kind of power over my life. Instead, I was involved in circumstances that created who I am and gave me the power to change my own life. And I hope that we in this group can reach out to other people and continue to do that. We as Democrats, we meet people every day with stories that hit us because we have hearts. And we can help create the dialogue that needs to happen in our communities. When we are registering voters out there on those college campuses, we can empower young people to report these crimes. We can empower them to understand that we're not going to just let this continue to happen. So I want to open up the floor to questions first, or comments. And truly, there's nothing that you can say or ask that I'm not going to answer or that's going to make me uncomfortable. If you have an opinion on the Me Too versus Time's Up, I'm very willing to hear it.
I'm a bit confused why it's versus. I thought they're both beneficial and positive, leading to kind of the same realm.
So, and that's a very good point. They should work together. There's a slight difference. For example, some of us have had the life experience of being raped or assaulted, and that falls under the Me Too hashtag. Time's Up. You can have experienced harassment at many levels and never actually experienced a rape or an assault. and that falls under Time's Up. Many of us have had the joy of experiencing them both, and then we get to use both hashtags. Yay for us. However, you can, when the Me Too came out, people that were hashtagging Me Too, I'm an ally. I myself, I'm not a lesbian, I am not gay, I'm not trans, but I'm an ally. So I use hashtags to support the LGBTQ community, and I make sure that I also hashtag ally, and I show support for those movements. So when we use that terminology, when we do that, we can say I'm an ally for the Me Too movement, but when I hashtag Me Too, I'm saying, yes, me too, that happened to me. When I hashtag Time's Up, I'm saying, you're doggone right. I have experienced discrimination. I have experienced harassment because of Time's Up. Yes. So there's a difference, and we need to dissolve and resolve both of those issues going forward.
I guess what I want to ask is, where's the definitions? Where can the definitions be found? And the reason I ask this is, I was thinking that Time's Up meant it's time for something to be done. You can no longer be innocent for abusing, raping, hurting another person in this way. I thought that's what that meant.
Yeah, so Time's Up, we're not going to put up with it anymore. Time's Up, you can't continue harassing people. Me Too was very specific about sexual assault. It was very specific about that. They were started by two different groups of people, and two separate organizations, two separate causes. So that's where the two hashtags came from. Time's Up can relate to both. People who have experienced the sexual assault will always use the Me Too.
Right.
Yes. Time's Up is, we're changing the landscape. Me Too is, I'm a victim.
Gotcha. That makes complete sense.
Does that clear it up?
Absolutely.
Okay. And it is confusing, and that's part of why we want to have this conversation, because people want to be supportive, people want to help, but then if we go out there, and these hashtags were created to help make public aware, just like when we're out there supporting a candidate. If we go out and we're talking on behalf of a candidate and we don't know that candidate's platform, we can do more harm than good. So if we don't understand the difference between the two of them, we can do more harm than good.
So, I have a question about, if somebody incorrectly uses, especially with the Me Too terminology, which has happened, and it was someone kind of an authority position, is there a way that you would say is graceful and appropriate to bring that to their attention, that they might be incorrectly using?
So the first thing that I would do is never assume someone doesn't have the right to use Me Too. You can't assume that someone hasn't been sexually assaulted. So that's a private conversation to have with that individual, to be certain that they aren't utilizing that because that's their way of letting the world know that they were assaulted, first of all. Secondly, if they're just using it because they're trying to say, hey, everybody, jump on the Me Too bandwagon, use this hashtag, then that is another conversation to have with that individual and say, I think perhaps you're wanting everyone to use the Time's Up hashtag, which actually is more of the umbrella to deal with changing that landscape. And again, you want to be sure. The last thing you want to do is make a huge Facebook or Instagram war conversation about it. We don't want infighting amongst ourselves. That doesn't help anyone. But you can have that conversation through a private message or a private conversation and just say, there is a difference, and I'm not offended. I'm not offended if somebody uses Me Too and they weren't. Honestly, that makes me feel good to know that they weren't. I don't want anyone, I'm sorry, but you were not sexually assaulted. You don't get to use my words. That has never crossed my mind. However, going forward in educating people, we want to give everybody a platform. The whole idea is we want to give everybody a voice. Mm-hmm. And so we want to help them find those platforms. The Me Too movement is a great platform for those who want to feel empowered to finally be able to say, I'm not the only one. I'm not weak. And Time's Up is the same thing in a different context. Just because you didn't get raped doesn't mean that you haven't faced harassment for years, or that things haven't happened to you that have changed the course of your life, and you're tired of it. They can overlap one another as well.
But even if it hasn't happened to you, you can still be an ally and be the kind of.
Right. I mean, my husband is absolutely correct. Believe me when I say what has happened to me has had a great impact on him. I met him after all of the things that have happened to me happened. But again, how that changes you as an individual and how I deal with it on a daily basis. Because as I mentioned, I'm a bit of a badass feminist, and it really impacts him and our relationship and how I raise our sons and how I interact in our relationship, all of that. And so he is a huge ally of Me Too and Time's Up. He's a huge feminist. He was a feminist before he met me, of course, which kind of helped me be attracted to him. But yes, just like as I said, I am an ally to LGBTQ, and I am an ally to Black Lives Matter. People can be an ally to Me Too with that in mind, as long as we understand the language and what we're saying that we're an ally to.
Right. And
Let's
I think that was
understand.
more my question is making sure that
They
people
understand.
who are using things understand and doing
Absolutely.
that in a
Yes.
graceful way.
Yes. Absolutely.
I think another thing we need to understand is that you talked about what happened in your childhood. I taught for many years. These experiences affect the fact that there are possibilities that will never be realized, because this hangs over a person's head forever. When it happens to you as an adult, there is not a day that you don't remember this. There are paranoias that will follow you for the rest of your life, and this is something that people who haven't been affected maybe sometimes don't realize. There's a reason I react in the way that I do at certain times, and I'm not asking for sympathy. You can't sympathize if you've not had the experience. I'm not asking for sympathy. Just understand there's a reason I stand on my pedestal on certain things and come out real strongly on certain things, because, like I say, this is with you every day to the end of your days.
It is something that never goes away. It doesn't ever stop. And you made the word sympathy. That's such a great word. For a long time, I didn't want people to view me as weak. I didn't want people to know about it, because I viewed myself as very strong and independent, and I had to work through that didn't change that about me. But there's a huge difference between sympathy and empathy. I do not like being startled or surprised, and I tell people very adamantly, do not do it. I don't want to accidentally punch you in the nose. And I have a very strong fight or flight response, and I mean really. And so we all have things, once that has happened to us, that change us forever, and you do face it every single day.
I realized 2 or 3 years later when I was having a crown fixed with the dentist, and back where I thought I was going to choke to death, because that was another part of mine that was almost choked to death. All of a sudden I came out of that chair and I almost punched the guy's lights out before I realized what I was doing. So now when I go to the dentist, I warn them, and I use a little strong language of, please, if that water runs down my throat and I think I'm going to choke, guess what I'm going to come out of the chair doing? And
Yes.
and then I have people look at me like, well, it's.
And I think that is
I
perfectly.
have warned you now, if you don't pay attention and don't do your dental hygiene stuff correctly, I will come up out of this chair.
Yes, and it's so interesting to me that you have had that exact experience, because my poor dentist, I kid you not, like, he has incredibly fast reflexes, because I almost took him out. And it just, I don't know, I got really panicky,
Yeah.
and I just had to get out, and I mean, arms are flailing, and he was just in the wrong place, and he's really patient, let me come back, but I mean, I felt terrible, but the dentist thing is really hard for me, because the whole thing is needing to always feel like you're in control of your environment, and that is one of those places where you don't have any control over your environment, and that is one of the hardest. I despise going to the dentist. It's one of the hardest things for me to deal
I don't
with.
despise it, but I've used it to educate absolutely every assistant who's working with the dentist. Don't let that water run down my throat, or you probably will have a black eye.
Yeah, it's very interesting that's a similar, and I would be curious to see how many of us have that new phobia.
Now we realize that at least 2 of us do.
Yes. And the other thing, knowing that, is, as sad as it is, you develop a kinship with others, and there's so many people out there. And again, it isn't just women. So many people. At first I thought, I'm part of this group of people that were molested as children, and it's heartbreaking to know how many there were. And then you find out how many people were raped, and the statistics that you read, don't even look at them. They're so not accurate, because so many, my molestation was not reported. So most, you can't go off of that. How many rapes never get reported? So those numbers that we see that frighten us and make us scared, those aren't even accurate. I promise you, know someone who has been molested. I promise you, know someone that has been raped. And be gentle with people. I live by the rule, you never know what someone is going through. You never know what someone has been through, because I have been constantly amazed by people's stories. And once you tell your story, they're very willing to share theirs with you. And it's amazing to me how the human spirit persists, because what other humans put other humans through is atrocious. But we continue to go, and then there are people like the people in this room who are determined to make the world a better place. And that's what gives me hope, because I believe that we can. I believe that we can educate the public. I believe that we can help young people continue to understand Rape is not okay. Being raped is not okay. We can report it. We can start prosecuting this. We can make it understood that it is a violent crime. It is not a sexual crime. It is a violent crime, period. It is a violent crime, and it must be prosecuted. And once we start dealing with these issues, we as a society are going to be better. And that's our goal, right? That's why we come here every April, is to continuously make our society better. Does anybody else have any questions or thoughts? Yes.
I have a minimum of three instances in my life that would fall under Me Too and multiple under Time's Up. My first issue, or my first problem, was when I was around 3 or just before I turned 3. But I had forgotten about that for a long time. And then I had another issue when I was about 5, and the neighbor boy who did this to me, said that if I ever told anybody, he would kill me and kill my mother. So I didn't tell anybody. When I was in around 8th grade, we were having a unit in my physical education class that was having to do with telling somebody type of a topic. You know, if you had something happen, be able to talk to somebody. Well, during that unit, you know, flashbacks were starting to come back of when I was 5. And I had gone home. First I told a friend, my closest friend, and then I went home and I told my mother. And I went to I don't remember how much time had passed. It was probably the same day, but I was in my room and I could hear my mom on the phone talking to her best friend, and I heard her sobbing. And she was telling her friend what I had told her about when I was 5. And because I'm sure my mom felt so awful and guilty, she had left me for 10 minutes, maybe tops, to run up to the corner store for something she needed, and she'd left me home alone. And like I said, I never told anybody. And then, so I came out. Oh, the other reason she was sobbing, part of the other reason she was sobbing, is she said, and Lacey had an issue when she was in preschool, and she started telling her friend, and then it's like it hit me. The memory came back. All the memories of that time flooded in, and then I came out sobbing. So she and I were then sobbing together. So, you know, those were my first 2 of the that would qualify under the Me Too. And, you know, that was a hard time to look at that, and it's very frustrating that those things happen so easily to little boys and girls.
And so was your mom, it sounds like your mom was very supportive of you, but at that same time, I think dealing with her own guilt that it happened to you, which that's a struggle too. You know, the loved ones involved when something bad happens. In my instance, with what happened to me as a child, my mom wasn't really a big concern or concerned about it, but my grandmother was beside herself and terribly traumatized that it could have happened to me. And not long after the age frame where this had happened to me, I ended up living with my grandparents. You know, I was too little to understand the dynamic of all of that. But looking back now, I can imagine that it was because my grandparents removed me from an unsafe environment, and I lived there for several years. And so, you know, looking now as a mother and soon to be grandmother, I think how awful for my grandmother that when she found out, she thought, if I had just gotten her sooner, that I can't even imagine trying to deal with that. And so I would imagine that was very hard on your mother too.
She was probably wondering why I cried so hard when it was time to take me to daycare. She didn't realize, and I think that was part of the guilt too, why she was so upset, is because I didn't want to tell. I don't think I knew that it was I don't know if maybe you can talk about your experience a little bit on this, but I feel like I didn't know that it was so wrong. I was probably embarrassed, and I don't know, somehow I did feel to blame. That could be why I didn't even say anything. I do know that I had trouble wedding as well during that time. I had potty trained, and then I fell back on it because of probably that experience.
Yeah, as a child, we don't really know that much about, especially that many years ago. Now, it seems like we teach our kids a lot more about things like that at a younger age. But back then, we didn't. I watched Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers, and that was the extent of any knowledge I had about anything. And I really didn't know. And so, I was 8, 9 years old before I said anything, because at that point, it was like, hey, I'm pretty sure that was absolutely wrong. That was not supposed to happen. The form of molestation that I experienced was my mom's second of 6 husbands forced me to perform oral sex on him. Now, I remember it happening to me at age 3. I have no idea how early. That's my earliest my earliest memory is age 3. He came into my life when I was a year old. But think about that for a second. Think about a man forcing a 3-year-old little girl to do that. I mean, it's beyond anything that I can imagine. But that was an incredibly uncomfortable conversation. I was an awkward, late-blooming adolescent. I was super skinny. I had absolutely not experienced any sort of puberty whatsoever at 8.5, 9 years old. And I was scared to death to tell anyone. But I also felt like, this is wrong, and I feel like I should have a conversation with somebody about this, and it's really kind of bothering me. And so I waited until my mom was in a good mood to tell her, because she scared me. She had a really violent temper. And so I waited until she was in a good mood, and then I told her, and then nothing happened. So I grew up thinking I had done something wrong. And again, that though, aside from the acts happening, growing up with that mentality can really affect how you view yourself, how you view sexuality, even though molestation and rape shouldn't have anything to do with sexuality. When that happens to you as a child, it can strongly impact your view on those things if no one ever tells you anything different. As an adult, later in counseling, it did, but then it didn't. So were you able to receive counseling? No.
I didn't. No. And there was a time. There was a time during my teen years that I had asked my mom or mentioned something about counseling and cancer, but during that time frame, she did. That was one of her regrets, that she hadn't got me into counseling when I was younger.
And again, I think maybe that has to do with the age. Now it's okay. We will send our children to counseling if there's something that they need to talk about, or we just think it's a good idea. We'll send our kid to counseling, no problem. But then it was different. It was a private matter. We're not talking about this with everybody. My goodness, that's embarrassing. And again, I should have been embarrassed.
Well, I think too, wasn't there kind of a stigma with counselors, psychologists? Was
Right.
Something
Right.
You
Well,
want-
exactly. That's what I'm saying. That, you know, you don't want your child going to a psychologist. Oh my goodness, that means your child is broken. And if we have to take our child to a psychologist, then I must be a bad parent. And everybody already thinks I'm a bad parent. We don't need to broadcast it. That was what was happening in my life at that time. So that's what I got. Yeah.
These experiences too, that people need to realize, these memories rear their ugly head at the most unexpected moments. So, you know, I mean, my life can be going along just fine, and all of a sudden some little something, and it's like, oh, there it is again. And of course, we all react, and
Yes.
people wonder what in the world is wrong with her.
Yes. And it used to be for me the anniversary. The anniversary of the rape for me was my dark day. I didn't want to see anybody. I didn't want to talk to anybody. And I noticed maybe 3 years ago that I forgot. And I woke up the next morning.
That's scary too.
Well, no, just forgetting the day. It made me feel so good. I mean, it was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. So that was incredible for me. Things that have happened to me is I have run into him. Since, you know, you get 1 year restraining order, and then if he doesn't rape you again or kill you, you don't get another one. So the restraining order was over, and now, you know, he's about to move around just as he wants to. And I ran into him one evening, and I decided that I wasn't going to leave. So I walked up to his companion and I said, I hope you enjoy spending time with a rapist. And his companion looked at me and he said, I'm sorry. And I said, he's a rapist. I just thought you should know. And I looked at him and I said, I'd like you to leave. And he said, I'm not leaving. And I said, well, neither am I. And I managed to stay for about 10 minutes, and then I couldn't anymore. And I left, and I cried for 2 days. But I made it through those 10 minutes, and that was a huge victory for me. So, you know, but there's always that, what's going to happen if I see him again? Those are things that go through my head, because I never know when he's going to pop up.
On that anniversary, I left town every year for several years. It was kind of expensive, because I had to go someplace else, and it, you know, whatever expense with staying overnight in a hotel or whatever. But I left town
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
several years on that particular day.
I just want to say I commend you for standing up and right in front of him and doing what you did, because that took a lot of guts, and I got to hand it to you. That was awesome. And thank you for sharing your experience today too. That took a lot of guts as well.
Well, thank you for letting me share, and thank you for caring enough about the Me Too and Time's Up movement. Being an ally is incredibly important, and remember that this is, again, it is not a female issue. It can happen to anyone issue, and we have to continue to keep educating people and fighting it. So thank you all.
Okay, so this is the last breakout session of the day. We have two options. One that's going to be in this room is Truth to Power, activating your inner organizer. And we're going to have three grassroots organizers from different walks of life to kind of talk about how we can be more helpful to getting things we want to get done in the community, and helping candidates. And then right next door is running for office, and kind of a talk with your state legislators. We're going to have Representative Crystal Quaid and Representative Bruce Franks Jr. In the other room. So.